life and testimonies, trials and troubles, I will be still surviving. Through my pain and times of sorrow, I will be still surviving. Be it family, stress with enemies, or addiction, I will be still surviving.
Hi, I'm Clarissa Baggs, creator and executive producer of Still Surviving. When we filmed the upcoming special episode months ago, none of us had any inclination that it would air at such a time as this. Today's episode focuses on post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. In our current environment of upheaval, uncertainty, unexpected business and job loss, political stressors, debts, a pandemic, protests and riots, battles with depression and anxiety and triggers for PTSD are on a constant upward trajectory. This will inevitably become more realized once these times have passed and we begin to adjust to our lives in a new normalcy. So many of us have found ourselves isolated and without the human interactions we need to thrive. It is my hope that after watching this special episode, you will walk away with a greater understanding of what PTSD is, what it does and does not look like, and knowing that you are not alone in your journey towards healing. Thank you for watching.
Still surviving.
Welcome to Still Surviving. I'm your host, Gigi Blackshear. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or P.T.S.D, has most commonly been associated with military service. However, we know that in today's high stressful, often traumatic environment that we live in, most, if not all of us, are suffering from some form of traumatic stress. Our guest, Christian psychologist Dr. Deborah Eichelberger, and I will discuss what post-traumatic stress disorder is and how we can help those that may be suffering the effects.
In the midst of helping everyone else, I failed to help myself.
Because their reaction is never as bad as we make it out to be in our mind.
And I know that it is not for us to carry.
I typically tell them the only thing you've got to change is everything.
Let people know that there is a life after.
A better you, a stronger you, you're going to see a fighter when you come out of the other side.
A overcomer, a survivor, and a victor.
To me, to myself, I am a conqueror.
Still surviving.
Dr. Deborah, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Can you tell us exactly what that is?
Sure. Post-traumatic stress disorder, as many people would know it as PTSD, is a type of anxiety disorder. It is an anxiety disorder's family. And what it is, it's when someone has faced a very traumatic experience, whether it be military-based or being in a traumatic environment, a medical condition, living in a certain area. Any of those things can bring upon anxiety stressors. However, we call it post-traumatic stress because those symptoms are showing up after the fact. So it's after they have gone through something traumatic in that particular period of time. They may not be experiencing those sensations or those symptoms, but after the event has taken place, they have started to feel these symptoms.
Okay, so my experience with post-traumatic stress was my brother that had come back from the military, and he came back in a state that he was not himself. He acted out, he was angry, he was fearful. I mean, there was a whole gamut of emotions that we didn't really understand. And again, most of the time we say it's something related to military service, but that's not always the case.
No, absolutely not. And the unfortunate thing is that there's a lot of people within our society who may actually fit the diagnosis of PTSD and not even know it because we automatically assume that it is only for the military. But we have found that a lot of people who have gone through sexual trauma, who have gone through medical diagnoses that have been traumatic to them, those who have gone through major deaths in their family, or even witnesses. So they may not have had to experience it themselves, but they could have been a witness to a particular event, and they too can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Especially when we're thinking of things such as terrorist attacks at 9/11, a lot of people did develop post-traumatic stress disorder after that event, even though they weren't personally involved in it.
So let's talk about, we said post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is after the fact that these symptoms are showing up, after the stressful or traumatic incident. When we look around at the environment that we live in, there are all types of traumatic circumstances and situations. When you think about shootings in classrooms, mass murders, all of the things that we hear about just on the news every day, all of these circumstances and situations can create this disorder.
Correct. And even in situations such as within your own neighborhood, so it may not even be a mass shooting, but you witness someone getting shot, or you live in an environment or in a neighborhood that is very high crime rate, and it leaves you in a very post-traumatic state, even if you don't recognize it, because you show all of those symptoms. You're frightened by certain things, you try to avoid having certain discussions. You can see it play out in their aggressiveness and in their, what we would call negative assertive behavior, where we just don't want to deal with those people, but in truth and in fact, they are reacting to what it is that they have been experiencing on a daily basis.
So let me ask you, because I've heard of circumstances and situations like, for instance, one of the students in the classroom, she found her brother, he had hung himself. And this is a child that's in the 4th grade. And so having to walk into that situation, that has to be traumatic for that child going forward.
Absolutely.
When you see things like that, what is it as a mother? I mean, what can you do to get help for that in that situation? Because there has to be some after effects of something as traumatic as that.
Absolutely. The one thing that we have to do, and I think it really takes situations such as this, our talk that we're having now, and school officials recognizing what those symptoms are. Because more than anything, what is the main place that our children are spending time at? More than any other place outside of the home, it's school. And if the school officials, teachers, staffing, guidance counselors, administrators, they really do need to be coached on what post-traumatic stress symptoms look like. Because a lot of what we're deeming bad behavior, I'll say in quotes, bad behavior or aggressive behavior, they're fighting, and we know that this is not necessarily the pattern of that child's behavior. We have to recognize that this behavior is not the child. It's their way of reacting to the trauma that they have experienced. And the sooner that we can recognize these after effects and get them into treatment, the better they will be. Because we have to remember, they're reacting to something, and it can be something in the environment that gets triggered. So for example, the little girl who found her brother hung, he may have been wearing a particular color. Every time now that she sees someone wearing that color, that could be a trigger for her to either start crying or she could start acting out. And if you ask these little ones, why are you doing this? I don't know, because they don't articulate the fact that it's this event and this thing on this event that's triggering me, because we don't know what can trigger it. When we talk to military and retired veterans, they say it's the smell of an exhaust. It's the backfire of a car. It's going to the gas station. It's the smells of gasoline, going into a large crowd of people, seeing people dressed a certain way, a particular color. We never know what that trigger is going to be because it's after the effect. And we kind of have to walk them through the different things that could be a trigger that's bringing out that negative behavior.
Because we're faced with so many instances of trauma, how is it, or what can we do to look for these? Is there a list of symptoms, or is there something that you can recognize that might help you in dealing with someone that may be exhibiting these symptoms?
Absolutely. So because PTSD falls under the family of anxiety disorders, some of those symptoms are going to be very similar as if someone is having another anxiety disorder. So seeing when they are interacting with people and the closed offness that they now have, whereas they used to be very open. That is also some of the symptoms that you can look for. And another thing to let everyone know is PTSD can show up even years after the event. And I think a lot of times in those types of situations, it's not handled very well because you're thinking you should be over it, especially within our culture, minorities culture. It's the idea of this happened 5 years ago. You should have been over it. But we don't know exactly when this particular disorder can affect a person, because we think about people who are in the military and they are in this state of just going. They've been in there 15, 20 years, they showed no signs of symptoms. They come home for 2-3 years, they're no longer in that environment. You can start to see them having those types of reactions. Or another one that people don't think about is children who are in an abusive household, who are being sexually or physically abused, because they have become this norm in their life and they've learned how to deal with it. When you pull them out of that normative environment and you put them in a more stable environment, that's when you start to see the symptoms taking place. But no one is connecting because they lived this way for so long. Now that they're out of that environment, these are the results of living in this traumatic environment for such a long time.
Dr. Deborah, we talked about post-traumatic stress disorder being commonly associated with the military. And I know from my own experience, women are more readily seek out help. We'll go and talk to someone, we'll go and get counseling. Can you tell me what you think the effect is for men dealing with this disorder?
Many times men, and this is just beyond PTSD, but specifically for PTSD, they will mistake their behaviors as being normative of male behavior. The aggressiveness, the avoidance of people and situations, they may not as readily realize that what they have experienced has caused these traumatic impacts on them. I think of especially our young boys more than anything else. They're not given the opportunity to voice their feelings or express their feelings. And with our men, they have been traumatized by women. They too have been sexually abused. They have been victimized, especially within our society, unfortunately, where we still deal with a lot of discrimination. We see a lot of police shootings with our African American men. We may not be experiencing it directly, but it causes that post-traumatic symptom to show up in our men that they may not even be aware of, where they could start to get very nervous when they see a police officer's car, or if they're children and they are out and random people approach them, they may get defensive. That is reactions to post-traumatic stress, and our men are not given enough chances to just talk because it isn't considered the right thing for a man to do. A man should be able to bear it and they should be able to just deal with it and handle it. When that's not what they're being asked to do. They too need help and they need assistance. And some other people who may not recognize that they have gone through traumatic situations are those that have faced racial discrimination, whether it be in a social aspect or at their job, those that are in high stress jobs, those that have gone through domestic violence or any type of violence put upon them by someone else. We mentioned about physical and sexual abuse, but people who have been emotionally abused or mentally abused doesn't get a lot of attention as well too, but that can be just as damaging, if not even more, when you have been torn down so much by a person. You have developed a post-traumatic stress because if anybody says something in that area that they were destroyed in, it triggers that in them. And that person could just simply be asking them a regular question. So, for example, if someone had always been demonized about their sides. And then someone comes up to them and says, hey, you look nice, you look like you've been losing weight. That can trigger something. And you, who just believe that you're just giving them a compliment, you see them just completely get angry or agitated, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to deal with them. But they're not realizing that their response is linked back to that mental and emotional abuse that they have gone through. So our men need to recognize that, and us women in their life need to give them that space to be able to feel comfortable to talk about that and let them know you're not going to be seen as less than because you need help.
You're seeking help.
Absolutely.
That is amazing. Post-traumatic stress disorder shows itself in many, many different ways.
Yes.
Many different ways.
Yes.
And
just because someone is handling it does not mean they don't need help. Some of us are better capable of handling more stressful situations than others. So the one who is at home, who can't do anything because of what has happened, should not be given more attention versus the one that's still going out there and trying to work, trying to live, but they're still experiencing these symptoms. They have to be treated equally. We don't give them less attention because they're trying to keep going.
And part of helping to get help for this issue is having a conversation like what we're having today and really talking about it and making it normal, bringing it down to a level where people don't feel like they're going to be ostracized or that they're going to be judged harshly or treated in a negative way because they're seeking out help to deal with this issue.
And research shows us that one of the greatest treatments for PTSD is group therapy. Writing in a group setting of others who have gone through the same trauma, writing out the events and going through those events to release the negativity that is connected to those events. Group therapy has been shown to be one of the greatest ways to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder.
So let me ask you, so someone that is exhibiting these symptoms, what would you suggest that if I recognize that a member of my family or a friend or someone that I've come in contact with, if I begin to recognize that this person is exhibiting symptoms that are outside of their norm, what would you suggest that I do? Would you suggest that I approach them and try to talk to them about it, or refer them for help outside of our relationship? What would you suggest that you do? How would you handle it?
The first thing that I would recommend is to have a conversation to let them know what it is that you're seeing from a loving perspective. Because many times those that are suffering from the disorder may not even recognize and connect their behavior back to what had been taking place, or realize that they're doing these types of behaviors, especially the ones that are like the avoidant behaviors or having that shortness of breath or panic attacks. They can just simply say, oh, I'm just an anxious person. And once they come to the realization that they are exhibiting these behaviors, the next step would be is to refer them to a doctor, to not only get properly diagnosed, but to start the process of healing. And that can be a psychologist, a mental health therapist, it could be a clinical social worker, or just even your primary doctor who can then refer you to someone, because you need, a lot of us don't have a mental therapist on speed dial, but we do have connections to some type of physician, or even going to the emergency room and saying, hey, we're dealing with these symptoms right now and it's really impacting them. They can recognize that, okay, this person needs to see a specialist within the therapeutic realm, and they can give referrals in that way as well.
Can get help.
Yes.
Dr. Deborah, thank you so much for sharing that information with us. We know that we all have friends and family members and people that we come in contact with that have had to go through traumatic circumstances and situations. So it's wonderful that you have given us some tools that we can use to really try and help address some of those issues that we find in our communities and with those people that we deal with every day. We know that life can be challenging.
Yes.
It's hard. And when you recognize that someone is having a difficulty, being able to go to that person and reach out to them and offer some measure of comfort, and then offer them some other tools and resources that they can seek out and that they can use to get help is so very important. Dr. Deborah, thank you again for that information. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. If you or someone you know is having difficulty dealing with any traumatic or stressful situation in your life, please know that there is help available. Reach out to a friend, a family member, a counselor at school, someone close to you, and let them know that you're struggling, that you're having difficulties. We all need each other, and we have to look for these cues and these the symptoms in order that we can help that person get the help that they need. Thank you for watching our show.
Through my life and testimonies, trials and troubles, I will be still surviving. Through my pain and times of sorrow, I will be still surviving. Be it family, stress with enemies, or addiction, I will be still surviving. With God on my side, forever will I remain still surviving.